Why do they call it the Neverending Story even though it has an ending? I'm aware, the name is a metaphor. Stop typing, it's an opening gag. When you think of a movie franchise that went way downhill, a lot of the time you'll think of the Neverending Story. What started off as a charming fantasy movie got spun off and sequelized into, well, nothing, ironically. Let's take a look and see what happened. How did the Neverending Story series come to this? Before we take a look at any of the films, let's take a look at the book. Because yes, for those 6 of you out there who don't know, the Neverending Story was actually a book first, written by Michael Ende. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Ende, Steve? I don't know. The book followed a kid by the name of Bastian Balthazar Books. And no, it's not Bucks like in the movie, it's Books. We'll come back to that in a minute. It even says in the book, it's ironic that he's named Books because he loves reading them. Bastian is one of the last kids his age with an imagination. Perhaps, maybe he has too much of an imagination. He's always got his head in the clouds and he's daydreaming about everything, really. One day he comes across a book called The Neverending Story and begins to read it, and as he reads it, he finds a strange connection to it. Midway through the book, he gets pulled inside the Neverending Story, and then begins his life as a pseudo-god running the whole land of Fantastica. He has a necklace called the Orin that can grant wishes, but with every wish he makes, he loses a memory. And over time, this power gets to Bastian's head, and he becomes a psychopathic dictator, ultimately culminating in a giant bloody battle where almost everyone dies, leaving Bastian to cope with his loss and his choices. But in the end, everything's okay and we all have a happy ending. The book is definitely fairly dark, although it is very creative and imaginative, so kids could still get into it. After all, Michael Ende was a children's author. So in the early 80s, his book was going to get adapted into a German-American co-production. It was all done in German and then dubbed into English, by the way. It was during a time when computers weren't really being used for special effects, so everything had to be practical. The film was expensive, it went on way past its allotted production time, and it was just an overall headache to make, but it was released to critical acclaim and very high financial success. The only downside was that Michael Ende did not like it. He viewed it as a very bad adaptation of his book. To be fair, they do get a lot of things wrong. There are some parts that they cut, like the part where Atreus saves Falkor from the beast that can transform into a spider. Those were cut because of technical limitations. However, they changed the names of a bunch of places and people, and for no real reason really. Fantastica becomes Fantasia, Bastian's last name becomes Bucks instead of Books. They also made the highly inappropriate Southern Oracle, and his biggest criticism, it didn't adapt the entire book, it only adapted the first half. When you get down to it, the Neverending Story is split into 2 halves. The half that tells the Neverending Story itself, and the part where Bastian gets put into the story. The first film only covers the first part, and this probably wouldn't have been so bad if they had plans on making the second part a few years down the line. Keep that in mind. Even still, people love the Neverending Story and still do to this day. When I was a kid, this was my favorite movie of all time. Granted, that's not the case anymore, but I still really appreciate it and really enjoy it. The world that they build feels real and very imaginative. It makes sense after all. Fantastica/Fantasia is the world of imagination. And even if they did omit some scenes or got some names wrong, they keep all the subtle layers of existentialism that were in the book. Every moral, every subtext, it's all in there. I put it in the same adaptation category as, say, Baby Blues. Something that, while yes, it's not really a good adaptation, it does its job at being its own thing well enough to enjoy it. It avoids the missteps of, say, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or Half-Blood Prince, where it's just kinda trying to adapt the original while also trying to be its own thing and ending up becoming a muddled mess. This is because, above all, money was not the reason this thing was made. The reason it was made was to tell a never-ending story. The book. Never-ending story, not the metaphor for life being a never-ending story. Let's move on from that now. The Neverending Story was made to be a story. It was meant as a passion project. Something to show you a wonderful world filled with interesting characters and complex themes. Started off so well. And then years later they announced that there would be another Neverending Story movie, Neverending Story 2, The Next Chapter, which for the longest time had a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, but that has now changed. I know what you're all thinking. Was this a response because the author didn't like the fact that they only adapted the first half of the book? Was this made to please and appease him after all this time? Nope. This was a cash grab. In a very obvious way. There's a token gesture to adapt the second half of the book, but they get it very, very wrong. Bastion's our hero. We can't have him be the villain. No, we have to create this human embodiment of dying imagination. So it's basically if the Nothing was a woman. They do have the part about him wishing for things with the Orin and that removing pieces of his memory, but it's all to service some kind of nonsensical evil plot. Fantasia also feels a lot less energized and a lot less imaginative here. It just feels like any generic fantasy land. There are some parts that they get right, like the lake being acid. That's pretty clever, but that was part of the book. The parts that they don't get from the book just feel boring and bland. Bastion doesn't really go crazy here, he just kind of becomes an emo, bitter teen. Atreyu won't shut up about how he thinks Bastion's going down a bad path. Honestly, this reminds me a lot more of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe than it does the Neverending Story. Think about it. A lost and bewildered kid gets taken in by an evil woman sorceress who promises him great things if he goes under her wing. Eventually, this warps him into being bad and he goes too far, ultimately having to make a crucial decision to save his life, though a friend may be willing to sacrifice himself to save the person when the day is done. See? It's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But it's stealing from the book and not the movie because the movie came out later. Honestly, that's probably a coincidence, but you can tell this is definitely not meant to be a sequel, it's not meant to tell a story, it's not even meant to be an adaptation. The Neverending Story was popular, so they felt we have at least some source material to go off of, let's just use that and line our wallets. That'll be easy, that'll be cheap, and people let them have it. This soulless exchange of nothingness was panned and it bombed hard. As a kid, I could tell that there was something off about this one, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And like I said, it really comes down to passion. It comes down to intention. The intention behind the first film was to show you an experience. The intention of this one is to take your money. That's it. Got some bad news for you, folks. Doesn't get better from here. Gets worse. Later on down the line, they thought, hey, if we messed up with the second one, maybe doing a third one will mess us up even harder. That has to be what they were thinking. Otherwise, I could not in any way see how they thought The Neverending Story 3 was a good movie. I mentioned that the first movie was my absolute favorite when I was a kid. Well, this one was my least favorite. Again, that has changed, it has found a new placeholder, but at the time, this got me upset. Even I, as like an 8-year-old kid, knew that this was very, very wrong, it spat in the face of the original, and it was overall a complete mess. Whereas the first two movies take the two parts of the Neverending Story book and adapt them to some degrees of success, this one just goes for its complete original story. That's right, they made a movie off of Neverending Story fanfiction. No disrespect to fanfiction writers out there, but this really did feel like someone's really lame, poorly written fanfiction. It's about Bastion now in high school, I believe. He looks like he's in high school. And he reads the Neverending Story yet again, but this time, all of the characters come out of the book and into our world except Atreyu. He's nowhere to be found and he's not even mentioned. Yes, Atreyu, one of the 3 main characters in the Neverending Story series, isn't even mentioned in this movie. It's like having Harry Potter, but just Hermione isn't there. Just no Hermione, we don't know her, she doesn't exist, not there. It gets worse too. Whereas the first movie was very imaginative and expressive, the second one had some good ideas but didn't execute it well. This is just trash. It's absolute trash. It looks terrible, it's not convincing, and it tries too hard to be comedic relief rather than actually convince you that we're in a different world. Not to mention that everything just looks cheap. I don't for a second believe any of this is there. To be fair, I didn't believe too many things in the first film upon rewatch either, but that's because it was being made in the early 80s, and even so, the practical effects and puppetry were still very well done, especially for the time. This just looks terrible. Would you believe that Falkor here was actually made by the Jim Henson Workshop? Yes, that Jim Henson Workshop. I couldn't tell either. It's that bad. So let's go over our villain of the story. The first one, it was the Nothing, a disembodied force of pure evil and lack of imagination that was going to destroy all of Fantastica/Fantasia with no sense of personality or soul or anything. All it does is destroy. That's all it can do. That's all it knows how to do. The second one, it was basically the Nothing in human form, trying to serve out its purpose by destroying all of Fantastica/Fantasia, eliminating all sorts of literary classics and imagination from the world. And then this one is Jack Black. It's just Jack Black playing Jack Black. He leads a group of bullies called the Nasties, because I guess one of them accidentally crapped in their pants one day at gym and said, "Oh, that's nasty," and then another one said, "Ooh, that's what we should call ourselves." It's just bullies. That's it. No disembodied force of pure darkness. No evil sorceress who's bent on shaping reality into her vision. It's just some guy who wants your lunch money. We're kinda going on a downward slope here. Speaking of Harry Potter, let's have another one of those examples. After Harry killed Voldemort, his next foe was Miss Norris, the cat, who kept eating all of his food. That cat needs to be taught a lesson. That's the kind of downgrade we're talking about here. And it's not just the villains that get a downgrade. The sense of danger, the sense of imagination, the sense of anything that even the second film was able to retain is all reduced. I don't even need to tell you that this was just made for a cash grab. I don't even think they saw the other films before making this one. It's so detached. Even as a kid, I knew this wasn't in the same continuity. It didn't feel the same. Something was wrong. And it was wrong. Very, very, very wrong. They rang it out, squeezing every last little drop of life out of it, causing it to die as a shallow husk of what it once was. That is what caused the downfall of the Neverending story. People just not caring about its themes or what it was meant to be, and just saw it as a blank check that they could do whatever they wanted with and squeeze a lot of those pennies out of the audience, not realizing that what they were doing was tarnishing their brand. And it's ironic that it happened to the Neverending story, which was all about imagination and creativity. And then it just got turned into something that stood for exactly the opposite of that. Sad. Really sad. Let this be a lesson in the future. Be careful when you adapt. Be careful when you see a success. The way you handle your success could change your entire future and the future of the success itself. Well, folks, thank you very much for watching. Honestly, yeah, I can kind of see how the author would be upset at the first film. Heck, if someone adapted my book that I wrote, link in the description by the way, into a bad adaptation, I'd be kind of miffed too. But it was still a good movie that kept its heart. And it's sad to see that it got treated so poorly and went so downhill. But what did you guys think of the Neverending Story series, including the book? Comment below and let me know, because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and I'll see you guys next week.